feel he was keeping an eye on us, and that worried me. I certainly did not want Muddy to have any idea how I really felt about Peter. Not because of what she might think about it, but because it was private, very personal, and I wanted to keep it that way. The food we had brought with us from the farm lasted as long as we could make it, but in the end, of course, there was none left. After that, finding something to eat became our greatest problem. Not for Marlene. She would only have to brush the snow aside with her trunk or her foot to be able to find something edible underneath. And once the snow had gone, Marlene simply grazed as she went. She was on a constant scrounge, her trunk searching ahead of her. For much of our journey, we kept to the valleys, so there was always plenty of water for us to drink from the rivers and streams. And there were many days when Peter found us a hay barn to hide in, where Marlene could gorge herself all day long. But food for us was much harder to find. Again, it was Peter who saved our bacon, so to speak. In the Air Force, he had done the same training in living off land. It was something they all had to do in case they got shot down. And anyway, luckily for us, back home in Canada, he was used to finding food in the wild, scavenging for it, fishing for it, hunting for it. He had done this all his life, but, as he said, until now, scavenging had not included stealing. Every morning we would settle into our new shelter for the day, make ourselves and Marlene as comfortable as we could, and then sooner or later Peter would disappear. He would be back an hour or so later with something. Eggs from our hen house, maybe, or sausage, liberated, he called it, from someone's larder. There were carrots sometimes, even apples once or twice. It turned out that there were many homes and farms lying empty and deserted in the countryside. So many people, like Uncle Manfred and Aunt Lottie, had abandoned their houses and fled. And Peter scavenged for more than food. Once he came back with a fishing rod, and after that, we quite often had grilled fish for our breakfast. But there were times when he came back with very little, a few nuts and some half-rotten root vegetables. Several times he returned empty-handed altogether. Then we just went hungry, and those were the days with no food inside us, when it was the hardest to keep ourselves warm, even if we could manage to make a fire. Those were the worst times during our whole long trek, the days of hunger. The endless walking I got used to. I even got used to my blisters, to my freezing hands and ears, and my numb feet. The snow went away, but the cold never did. Sometimes, when I felt I could not take another step, I would feel Muddy's arm around me, and she would say always the same thing. Just put one foot in front of the other, Elizabeth, and we'll get there. It was her constant mantra. When I was at my lowest ebb, I would keep saying that to myself, trying my very hardest to believe it. There were so many times when I came close to giving up altogether. Thinking back, though, it was Marlene as much as Muddy's mantra that kept me going. Through wind and rain, mud and frost, Marlene just plodded on. She was our pacemaker, and we kept with her. When I was walking anywhere near her, I could hear the hollow rumblings of contentment from inside her. And that, for some reason, always made me smile, and so lifted my spirits. We all envied her ability to find food on the move, snuffling up dead leaves, tugging at what little grass there was. We took great comfort and courage from her endless patience and perseverance. And she treated us all now, Peter included, with great affection, as if we were her family. We certainly felt she was part of ours. She was forever touching us with the soft tip of her trunk, reassuring us and reassuring herself, maybe. If Peter was our guide and provider, and Muddy was our strength, then Marlene was our inspiration. Sometimes after the long hours of walking through the darkness of the countryside, when we were all hungry and cold and tired and the night seemed never-ending, Muddy would get us singing. We would sing her beloved Marlene Dietrich song or Christmas carols or the nursery rhymes and folk songs that Carly and I had grown up with. Peter knew some of these from his Swiss mother, so he would join in then too. Of course, Carly would sing out louder than any of us, conducting everyone from high up on Marlene. These were the moments, as we were singing our way through the night, that I felt all my fears fly away. I felt suddenly lightheaded and full of hope that all would be well. I cannot imagine why just singing together should be able to do this, but it did. It did not only pass time, somehow it lifted my heart, gave me new strength and fresh determination just to keep going. It was the same for all of us, I think. I suppose we must have been 3 weeks or so into our journey across Germany, and we were making such slower progress than Peter had expected. It was the streams and rivers that were holding us up. Streams we could have forded easily through. Marlene seemed quite happy to go back and forth, carrying 2 of us at a time. But to cross the rivers, we had to find a bridge, and a bridge that was not guarded, as many of them were. So whenever we came to a bridge, Peter had to scout ahead to find out if there were sentries. And if there were, it meant a long diversion along the river until we found an unguarded bridge. This made our journey a lot longer, and so we lost a lot of time that way. We knew that anyone and everyone who saw us or met up with us was a danger to us, but we could not avoid them altogether, however hard we tried. Even at night, we did meet a few people, some walking home to their village after dark, or sometimes shepherds out in their fields checking their sheep. And once a farmer, I remember, who came up upon suddenly behind a hedge. He was trying to help one of his cows give birth, and he needed a hand, he said. So Peter got down on his knees at once and pulled alongside the farmer. It took a while, but the calf came out alive and kicking. The farmer was delighted and shook all our hands energetically. It was only after it was all over that he seemed to pay any attention to Marlene. Muddy told him our story, and he seemed quite happy with that. We had a night in his barn, and his wife brought us some hot soup. They asked no questions, but kept bringing more and more of their family in to see Marlene. Far from attracting unwelcome attention to us, as Peter had thought, Marlene was turning out to be a kind of talisman. She seemed to divert attention away from us and away from Peter in particular, which was, of course, just what we wanted. Hidden away during the daytime, huddled together inside some shed or barn, we had heard and sometimes seen fighter planes flying low overhead, but we were safe from them, always well out of sight. Day and night we heard, too, the drone of the bombers overhead, but the fighters, they passed us by and left us in peace. Had it not been for the ever more distant thunder of Russian guns, we might almost have never been able to forget that there was a war going on at all. The deeper we went into the countryside, the quieter it became, and the safer we felt. There were some days and nights so still and silent now that it really seemed to me sometimes as if the war might have ended already, and we had just not heard about it yet. I remember Carly became ill quite quickly. Weakened by his asthma, he had never been a strong child. It began one evening with a little cough that would not leave him. Muddy swathed him in blankets, and for the best part of that night he rode up on Marlene as usual. But it was becoming obvious after a while that he just did not have the strength to stay up there, that he could fall off any time. Much against his will, Muddy persuaded him down and carried him the rest of the way in her arms. Peter and I were scouting ahead, looking urgently now for a place for shelter. Anywhere would do, just so long as we could get Carly out of the cold. There were no lights in the house, of course, because of the blackout, but it was moonlight night, which was why I caught sight of the dark looming shape of a huge building in the distance, and then the ribbon of a tree-lined drive curving through the fields toward it. From the sound of his cough and his wheezing, we could tell that Carly was getting worse all the time. He needed more than just a shelter for the night. He needed a doctor. We had no choice. We knew it was a risk, but we walked straight up the gravel drive and knocked loudly on the huge front door. It was a while before anyone came, and Peter was beginning to think that the house had been abandoned, like so many others. But then the door opened. We saw the light of a lantern. Holding it was an old man in pajamas and a nightcap. He did not look at all friendly.